it really can dull your senses. You can become numb. You can become non-existent in thought, right? You kind of dissociate, you go away. So that can look like a social...
Well, they're talking about numbness. I imagine that they're talking about alexithymia. Although alexithymia is very common for autistic people, it's also common with PTSD, from what I know. So maybe that's the sense of numbness that they're talking about. It's quite an interesting one, actually, like thinking about why autistic people have this experience of alexithymia, different difficulty noticing and categorizing emotions. Is it just because we tend to experience trauma more disproportionately than our peers? As we have been watching lots and lots of different videos about autism and trauma, it's been very apparent that there is some significant crossover between the presentation of the two, and also the fact that autistic people are much more likely to develop CPTSD and PTSD as a result of the negative, disproportionate life experiences that we can have. But I think it's important for us to try and sort of discern what the difference between the two are, and today we have a video from Tamara Hill, Asperger's and Trauma, Similarities and Confusion, a Psychotherapy Crash Course. If you do not feel in the right headspace to be talking about such a heavy topic, please make sure to click off, maybe watch another video which is a little bit lighter. It's up to you. I'm gonna see what kind of person they are. So they're licensed and nationally certified mental health therapist. Okay, cool.
Hey guys, it's Tamara. Thank you for coming back to my channel. Welcome back. We're going to be talking today about the differences between autism spectrum disorders, or Asperger's, and trauma symptoms. A lot of you emailed me, sent me tweets, sent me messages on my website asking that we talk about this topic. So I figured today might be a good day to start that conversation. So thank you so much for those who have come back to my channel and are subscribed. And if you're not subscribed, I encourage you to hit the subscribe button right over here on the side so you can stick around with us and learn and suggest topics because we do a lot of interesting and fun and self-awareness building activities here on this channel. Yes. So the benefits for you in today's video is that you're going to be able to learn the differences between Asperger's or autism spectrum disorders and trauma. You know, there's a lot of controversy around what has happened to the diagnosis of autism and Asperger's over time. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders is a really thick book, okay? It almost looks like, I have a bunch of books over here, guys, so...
I think it's worth also pointing out before we sort of get into this topic, yes, Asperger's is a outdated term. I think this video was created 2019. I'm not sure if the sort of DSM changes have passed at that moment, but nowadays Asperger's is referred to as ASD1 for anyone out there. Oh wait, we have a message from Katie Lewis talking about microdosing changed my life tremendously if you suffer with bipolar. Yeah, I've heard a lot about sort of the use of psychedelic based compounds. There was a particular news story that I saw, or study that I saw. A research news article about a study talking about how use of psilocybin can sort of help with addiction management. Seems to be something that needs a little bit more delving into, but I hope at some point sort of treatments along that way should be making its way into the health system. Hopefully, there's a lot of good stuff. DSM removed it in 2012. Oh, well, I think maybe at this time as well, people were a lot more sort of, they were using the word Asperger's still a lot, like Aspie and all that. So maybe that's why they're just doing it for the search terms. Shrooms, yes.
It's interesting that I have something that's similar to a DSM. So here's what a DSM looks like. Okay, this is one of my crisis manuals, and it has everything I need to know in here about crises that may occur. But the DSM is a little bit thicker than this, right? So if you can see the thickness of this book, the DSM is a little bit thicker than that. And there's a manual of the DSM a lot of nuts! That's this thickness. Okay, and so the DSM really is a manual focused on classification, really trying to give medical practitioners and mental health professionals a language. And so the DSM was updated from the DSM-4 to the DSM-5. And in the 5th version, the diagnosis of autism was changed and altered. What happened is autism used to be seen as a category, and there were small categories in the category of developmental disorders.
There was a lot of stuff, like what's a pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified, BDD, NOS. That was interesting. I actually knew someone from my university who used to join. I was joining sort of a running group, uni sort of part of a society, and there was someone in there who sort of led one of the classes who had that diagnosis. Also, like things like childhood disintegrative disorder, obviously Asperger's. I think maybe at the time, if I'm wrong, they had like Kanner's autism and classic autism. My mum used to get very frustrated at me because I used to call it classical autism. You know, sort of it's not the right way of saying it, but also like I don't know the word the term classic autism. It's like it's sort of a quip that someone would say. You know, someone says something autism related, classic autism. You know, I think there's a lot of different. And they've compiled them all into one singular sort of diagnosis, which varies based on the traits that people have, and also in terms of the level of support that they have as well. Classical music, Beethoven's autism. Yeah, classical like liberalism.
Developmental disorders are things that occur at birth or things that occur shortly after birth, and it affects the child's development, early childhood, middle childhood, adolescence, and early adulthood, and it can continue on for many, many years. So the developmental category in the DSM included autism, and autism was seen as autism from, the category of severe, the category of Asperger's. You would be put into a category if you were diagnosed with a disorder of autism or Asperger's. Asperger's like way up there, and then severe autism is way down there, or autism is way on the other end. And so people kind of saw an autism spectrum disorder as you either had it or you didn't, right? When the DSM updated itself, or we updated the DSM to the 5th DSM, or the 5th version, autism became more of a spectrum. And so on that spectrum, think of it in terms of a scale from 1 to 10. 1 is the worst, 10 is the higher functioning end.
I was going to say the phraseology. No, not too keen on this. I don't know what autistic people in general think. So I'm thinking specifically about like the advocacy spaces on Instagram, because that's a place that I've had the most sort of experience with. Sure, they've removed Asperger's, which I think a lot of people are happy about, some people not. I think if you're still diagnosed with Asperger's, you still do. I think one of the issues with this, with sort of compiling it all down into one diagnosis with different levels, 1, 2, and 3, is that it kind of gives people the wrong idea of what autism looks like. You know what I mean? And it also, like, people understood Asperger's as a term. So, like, when I was sort of a bit younger and using the term Asperger's, people would generally have a bit more of an idea of what I was talking about. Whereas if I go to people and say I'm autistic, it's more common their responses to be somewhat of a statement of disbelief to a certain degree. So I feel like it can, as language sort of changes, it can somewhat make it a bit difficult for like the public to understand the different aspects. But also, whilst the people who do not like the term Asperger's are kind of happy that it's been removed, I'd imagine that they're probably not too happy with the fact that ASD 1, 2, and 3 is basically, it's not the same really, because it's related to like the strength of characteristics and the support needs that someone has, but is basically like a scale of support that someone needs, a scale of autism, as Tamara is describing it as being like a 1 to 10 scale, which is not how a lot of autistic people like to describe autism as. Like, I think it can be useful when it comes to understanding what support needs someone has, but it's not generally how people view the spectrum as, from what I've seen from people. Yeah, I've had to use Asperger's in 2024 for people to get it for me. Exactly. You know, he stuffed all the hamburger in his pants. What are you talking about? Mozart was widely believed to be on the spectrum. Yes, I do know of this. Autism spectrum makes me question everything about being on a spectrum of severity. Yeah. I mean, I don't think the issue is that I don't think everyone's going to be... Hello, Emily. Welcome from Kick. I think you're probably the first person on Kick to chime in and say hi, so good to see you. What was I saying? Lost my train of thought now. Just enamoured. How's your day going? Not too bad. I'm good. I am on Restream, so if you do see messages from people on YouTube and Twitch, that is why. Just pointing that out for everybody. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how people feel about it, because I do think that it also leads itself to giving people the wrong idea of autism. You know, this idea of the spectrum being a 1 to 3 level system. It's a very medical way of looking at it, but I suppose at any point when you are sort of combining different areas in life, if you're combining the medical with the social, there is always going to be some sort of points of contention that each side has with the other sort of characterization. Interesting to talk about.
End of everything. So autism is now seen on a spectrum where you have severe autism, you may have some other developmental stuff in between, then you have moderate levels of autism or moderate levels of social disorders or challenges, and then you move up to the higher functioning, which is Asperger's. Now, it's not called Asperger's anymore. It's called high functioning autism. So the way that we talk about and kind of conceptualize autism spectrum disorders have changed over time.
Yes.
Now, if you want to incorporate trauma symptoms, that's where it gets a little bit more complicated. Trauma symptoms can have the very same symptoms and expression as an autism spectrum disorder when you're on that.
I don't think they have the very same, but I think there is a crossover between the two. I think there are some things which are not sort of seen in people with trauma as opposed to autistic people. But I suppose the issue is that there is a lot of overlap both in like the prevalence of each, like prevalence of trauma, PTSD related things for autistic people. It kind of muddies the water a little bit. No, you are not blocked, S. It's like how spicy is your autism, mild, moderate, or Thai hot? I mean, you're not wrong. I mean, oh my God. I think one of the first times I went to Thailand, I'd never touched any spice because I saw it as a silly thing to do, to want to inflict pain on you. But I did kind of get a little bit of a taste for it, you know. But one of the places that we decided to go first, we were in Thailand and we went to a place called Spicy Noodle. And I ordered spicy noodles from a shop, a restaurant called Spicy Noodle in Thailand. It was not good. It was literally like a ball of lava. It was crazy. Do you also stream on Twitch? We do indeed. However, most people I think are over on YouTube. Also, it feels like some people really want to be classed differently since Asperger's is supposedly high intelligence. It's so gross. Yeah, I don't know. I think some people, when it comes to, because there definitely is differences between myself in terms of the way that I function and live my life, as opposed to somebody who has sort of full-time, sort of around-the-clock support, you know. I wouldn't say that me pointing out that difference between myself and them is me, like, sort of, well, is that like the idea of like Aspie supremacy that you see? It's not. I don't think it's really like that. I think once you say that, you know, when you sort of get into the realms of like eugenics and like advocacy for particular groups, I think it gets a little bit murky in that sense. But I don't know. I think when it comes to online discourse, when people are talking about such things, there can sometimes be some like accusations about people's like intentions about certain things. you know, you point out a difference between yourself and how perhaps you have an easier time with working, sort of progressing in life, and you know, people might sort of assume that you're saying that you're better than them, which is, you know, whenever I make those distinctions, I'm not talking about the relative value that I offer as opposed to someone else, you know. It's a thin line, and it's difficult when it comes to the online stuff, because that tends to be like the autistic community is, for all purposes, kind of like an online space, to be honest. It's just so not this like monolith. It's kind of split up into different areas, but it's an online thing, you know, and miscommunication is a lot more likely to happen when you don't particularly know someone and you haven't spoken to someone in person, and you don't have the opportunity to ask sort of clarifying questions about stuff like that. So yeah, I don't know. It's all about you're talking about the spice. Not a fan of spicy food now. Should I keep my name now that this was brought up? Nah, you can keep it. It's cool. Everyone is better or worse than other people at everything. It's a very it's a very nuanced statement there. The spectrum is vast, 100%. Yeah, I'm trying. I'll try and sort of move my brain past the phraseology in this aspect of the video, because I don't want to keep stalling it to, you know, perhaps make commentary on that, because we are talking about the autism and trauma, which I think should be like the focus of this video.
On that spectrum, remember that, keep that in mind. We no longer see autism as you have it or you don't have it, black or white, polarized. We see it as a spectrum. So where along that spectrum is your autism? So when you think about that long spectrum and you conceptualize it as being on a scale from 1 to 10, 10 being the highest, if you go along that scale and you compare it to trauma symptoms, it begins to look very similar. And that's where things get complicated. It begins to look very similar. Okay. I'm going to point out some of those similarities so that you will have an idea of why these two disorders seem to either mesh or they collide. And sometimes there's misdiagnosis, and sometimes there's confusion, and parents get things confused, and providers. So it gets really complicated. All right. So let me give you some symptoms that tend to overlap. So the number one symptom that tends to overlap with an autism spectrum disorder and trauma is inattention. Oh. Inattention is the inability to have attention for long periods of time. And for kids that have autism, they have a lot of sensory processing issues going on. That's another thing that tends to overlap. The sensory
I was going to say that because piece. I'm pretty sure, like, sort of inattention is more seen with the ADHD side of things, which it's sort of even furtherly murky, because I think the majority of autistic people have a dual diagnosis of ADHD. So, but yeah, when it comes to like autistic inattentiveness, I think definitely when it comes to the like sensory sort of social aspects of it, can definitely be a factor in that. Didn't know about it in terms of trauma though.
Piece of all of this, right? There's too much stuff coming into the ears. There's too much to look at, right? There's too many smells, there's too much stimulation all around me. And some kids get so filled up with all that stimulation that they begin to do what's called STEM. And STEM may be like they do their hands like this, or, they may rock, or they may, do something else like hum. A lot of kids with autism hum, right? Some adults who are on the lower scale of an autism spectrum disorder, they hum as well. It's stimulating to them. It's soothing. So kids who are inattentive, they can be inattentive, and even adults, because of post-traumatic stress disorder, fight or flight responses, right? The body kicks off its fight or flight response sometimes when it doesn't need to.
Is that related to like dissociation? Is that what they're talking about? Is that why that occurs with like trauma? Because I do know that like disassociation is quite a large part of sort of responses to trauma or difficult circumstances. I used to experience it so much in school. So much. For most of my life actually, that I can remember, I've been disassociated heavily. It's only like probably the last 3 or 4 years that I've come out of this haze of dissociation. It's very strange. It's also not too good when you dissociate in the middle of a fight. during my Taekwondo days. Sometimes I would disassociate. What is disassociate? Shut up, Fuggy. Yes, it is dissociation. It's not disassociation. Yes, that's referencing dissociation. Well, disassociation was anxiety. I think it can be triggered by a lot of things. I think one of the more interesting aspects when it comes to autism is like the experience of an autistic shutdown. Because I don't know about you, but that's pretty much the focal point of what my experiences of shutdown are. The dissociation. Very, very strange. Strange feeling. Taekwondo, how do you spell it? I'll put it in the chat. There you go.
For people who have PTSD. All of that could lead to inattention. Another one is social challenges and what's called theory of mind, TOM, theory of mind. It's an autism spectrum or a developmental term to refer to an inability to understand sarcasm and puns. You have a very hard time tuning into what somebody else is saying. There's also a lack of empathy.
Is that what? What? Wait, what are they going to say?
Not because you don't care, but it's because you can't conceptualize how to
Right.
care.
Okay, they're talking about cognitive. Good. I thought they were going to say lack of empathy there. It's good that they didn't get that wrong. Puns, yeah, it's kind of a weird example to give theory of mind. Sort of brings us back to the idea of like double empathy and all that. But I think the reason why fear of mind kind of sticks around is because the way that the medical system works is that anything which is outside of the norm is seen as like it's always viewed from this normality standpoint. I don't know if I'm explaining that properly. We can't detect subtle sarcasm. I don't know, like it depends. If I know someone like very, very well and I talk to somebody and I have experience with them being sarcastic, I can tell. But it's just when it's like new people, you know. Puns is not fear of mind. I don't understand. There's a lot of like weird assertions in this video. I'm not really sure. I'm trying to be respectful, of course, because they are a medical professional. But yeah, I'm not feeling too great about this video. If I'm being honest. Is this an old video? 2019, Isabella.
And it's really hard for individuals with an autism spectrum disorder and those who have PTSD sometimes to put themselves in the other person's shoes or in the other person's mind and feel kind of what they feel or imagine what they could be feeling. So this theory of mind or this TOM issue also has a lot to do with trauma, because when you have been traumatized, depending on how severe the trauma is, it really can dull your senses. You can become numb. You can become non-existent in thought, right? You kind of dissociate, you go away. So that can look like a social...
Well, they're talking about numbness. I imagine that they're talking about alexithymia, because although alexithymia is very common for autistic people, it's also common with PTSD, from what I know. So maybe that's the sense of numbness that they're talking about. It's quite an interesting one, actually, like thinking about why autistic people have this experience of alexithymia, different difficulty noticing and categorizing emotions. Is it just because we tend to experience trauma more disproportionately than our peers? Who knows? It's really disappointing how little training therapists get for autism. Yeah, it's pretty bad. Like, it'd be good if they had like an updated sort of all sides kind of view of autism from the literature. That would be like the bog standard that I would want to expect. But like, I would definitely wish that, you know, people who do take sort of autism on as a job or a specialism or a profession, that they would also have a bit of insight into like the sort of socio-political kind of landscape online. That would be great. I'd love that.
Social challenge, especially when you haven't gotten counseling to work through that inability to be empathetic or that inability to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. So counseling helps individuals who have experienced trauma to deal with that. but it can look very much like autism. It really can. All right, the next one is obsessions. And intrusive thoughts, okay? Obsessions and intrusive thoughts can also be a symptom of OCD and anxiety.
That's what I was going to
say.
But
it can also be a very, very prominent feature of trauma. If you've been traumatized, or you have an abuse history, or you were in a terrible car crash, you're going to get flashbacks, right? And they're going to come in, and then they're going to leave. They're going to come in, and then they're going to leave at moments where they don't need to. So it becomes...
Here's a question. Is flashbacks just when a memory pops into your brain, just randomly? Is that what a flashback is? Or is it literally like how you see in the movies? Because I don't know. And everyone's so different and they have their own perception. It's hard to like sort of, represent it fully, I guess. But is that basically what a flashback is? Because I do get those. Often things that are quite random as well. Intrusive thoughts, that's another one. I do know some particular individuals within my own life who struggle with those intrusive thoughts. It's not a very fun thing. I don't know whether it's because I think maybe when it comes to intrusive thoughts, it's like especially when it comes to like social things that we do like morally and such, behaviors that we have. I can imagine that like because of the inherent grayness to it, or the possibility of anything happening for anybody, that those intrusive thoughts might come a little bit more easily to us, maybe. A flashback has a specific of it being a sudden happening. Sound can trigger it, as can be a smell. No, but I understand what you mean, but I mean, is it literally like there's like a flash and you see you sort of held into a certain memory and you just can't like move for that time? Or is it just like a thought just entering your head continuously? So a thought that you don't like? No, it's not like a flash. Okay. It's a feeling that consumes you. I have occasional moments of dissociation, particularly derealization, depersonalization. That's what I struggled with when I was younger. Flashbacks are your body being present, but your brain being stuck in a memory. Okay, I see. So it is kind of like that then. But it's kind of hard, isn't it? Like, how do you like map out at what you perceive and put it onto another human being, to see like, okay, this is a flashback, or, this isn't a flashback, like you've gone back in time in a flash. So it's not like a specific sort of, I suppose it can be intense, I guess, but yeah, I don't know, it's a hard one. It can feel like you feel yourself back in time. I worked on mine really hard. Takes a lot of work, I can imagine. Yeah, so intrusive thoughts, obsessions, obviously like special interests. I don't know if they're talking specifically about special interests or whether they're speaking more on the more sort of OCD kind of side of things. I'm not too sure. Let's continue watching. I realize that my camera is like directly over them. I'm just gonna like move myself over here so that I'm not being rude.
Is intrusive, then you might grab a hold of that intrusive thought and then think about it over and over and over and over. And we call that rumination, but we also call that obsession. And so when an individual with autism struggles with this, they're going to have a really hard time getting off of this cycle, right? This merry-go-round of over and over and over thinking. When I have seen kids that have an autism spectrum disorder, I was a supervisor at an autism clinic about 5 to 6 years ago. And I oversaw staff who were taking care of kids under the age of 20 in a classroom in a summer therapeutic program. And a lot of those kids were obsessed. They were obsessed with like little gadgets. They were obsessed with the thought that would get in their head. They were obsessed with something they heard on the news or on the radio. And it was really hard to move them away from that obsession. But that is just how their mind works. And somebody who has...
So like, I suppose when I go to my larger video, I'm going to go over to the side. It's a bit annoying. I don't know. I don't know if I'm necessarily an obsessed person. Maybe I am. Is it obsession? Just you just can't stop thinking about it, and it's just like a part of everything that you do. Because if that's the case, autism is definitely like an obsession of mine. That's hyperfocus, yeah. Like monotropism, like what we were speaking about the other day. Maybe. Yeah, I think so. But I suppose it's the reason why I'm struggling with the concept of obsession is because I come from an autistic point of view, being that it's not necessarily a bad thing all the time to be obsessed with like particular subject or hobby or interest. I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, but when it comes to like thoughts, like pieces of news that's happening, experiences, something that someone's said, and you're just kind of thinking about that over and over again. Maybe, I don't know, I'd kind of classify that as being like intrusive thoughts though. It's not obsessive if it's not negatively affecting you. Very true. Looking at it from that medical standpoint, I suppose. But they're not really making that discernment. They're not differentiating between the two, really.
Who has had trauma can also be the same way. The next thing that kind of relates to this is rigidity and sameness. Individuals who have an autism spectrum disorder do not like things to be changed or switched up. It's just not something that they want to deal with.
Not always.
It's too destabilizing for them. It throws them off. So it's really best for them to keep order. And wanting order means you're going to be rigid and you're going to want to control. Well, that same pattern is located under the criteria of trauma symptoms, right? Somebody who has PTSD certainly doesn't want to be tricked, surprised, or caught off guard. They want sameness, and wanting that sameness can look like rigidity. The next one is joint attention.
The sameness. I think for me, the times where I struggle the most with like changes in my routine or changes in general is when my anxiety is high. So do you think maybe the PTSD aspect of that is just the heightened anxiety that a lot of people can get with it? I do find that my difficulty with not having a routine, not having, or experiencing change is that there is sort of a level of certainty. It's not really about control to a certain degree. It's more about me knowing what's going to happen with certainty, and there's no sort of, I suppose that's the same thing, isn't it? But yeah, I mean, the certainty aspect of it is important to me because it helps me think, I can say to myself, this is what's going to happen in this way, and that's all good. And it gives me sort of a sense of safety or comfort. Peter says, Thomas, what I often find missing the mark is when these bullet points are stated bluntly, that there isn't mentioning of what to look for where this happens to be a thing. Yeah, it's like the whole thing where we're speaking about like the crossover between ADHD and autism. It's like quite often some of the crossovering things, like perhaps related to eye contact, is more about why it's happening that allows you to see the difference between the two rather than the actual fact that is a crossover. Do you know what I mean? So it's like with the eye contact example, it's, autistic people just find it painful. They really don't like it at all, whereas someone with ADHD might struggle to pay attention to someone else, or might be thinking about something or being distracted by things in the environment, which is why they may not make as much eye contact. So I think there's real importance in like the reasons for things, not just the actual things, to better sort of understand it. I think that's maybe where you're getting at, Peter. Audrey says, my son is diagnosed with severe ADHD, autism, and defiant behaviours that are unbearable. The CBD gummies. I mean, CBD is like, it's a godsend. I mean, I think to a lot of people it kind of comes across as this like snake oil. It's not like a miracle cure or anything, but it, from my experiences using it, having it, it definitely helps me a lot. Like it kind of sort of helps with the areas that a lot of autistic people might struggle in, which is sleep and anxiety. I think some things related to gut as well. It's the endocannabinoid system's like this very archaic sort of inbuilt system that we have that kind of has its roots in lots of different parts of our bodies. So that can be quite helpful. But yeah, I mean, because of the marketing hype, just like with anything, I think a lot of skeptics' immediate sort of feeling on CBD is that it's a snake oil, which I understand, but I think that there is a lot of use for it. Tried CBD oil for pain, not that good for me. It works a bit. Yeah, exactly. It works a bit, doesn't it? It's like, it's not this all-powerful thing that's just going to erase everything, but it helps, it's kind of the whole thing, like with me managing my anxiety. It's not like I have one thing that I do every day to manage my anxiety. It's like a whole host of different things from lots of different areas. So supplements, maybe it might be the CBD, magnesium. It's going to the gym. It's breathing exercises. It's a combination of lots and lots of different things, which ultimately helps me manage my anxiety, you know. I'm 27 and I feel like I have the brain of a child. What do you mean? I think the idea of like age and like how someone's brain should be is a funny one. It's very much based on like social normative values, but I don't particularly know what you're talking about specifically. It's really interesting to me because I'm hypervisual and used to deliberately focus on hallucinating my imaginary friends as a kid. Interesting, Potato. Hello, Layla. How you doing? Also, GABA. Yeah, GABA is the best. I love GABA. Gotta get some GABA. GABA is basically, for anyone who doesn't know, it's gamma aminobutyric acid. It's basically the inhibiting sort of neurotransmitter in your brain. You can usually find things like benzodiazepines, Valium, maybe people know it as that. They basically act on your GABA receptors. Alcohol does as well, it's just a different receptor. Anyway, we're straying far from the topic, as I usually do.
Joint attention is really hard for kids that are on the autism spectrum. They don't have the ability to be in the same room with someone and focus on the same thing, right? Kids with autism usually have a situation where there's one person focusing on something and they're totally not paying attention, and so they're over here doing something else. They don't have that joint attention where it's them and that other person focusing on something at the same time. You know, that person's going this way and they're like, hey, look over there. Did you see that? And the person with autism is like, no, what's over there? Oh, look at that, you know?
That's an interesting one, because I have seen that a lot in terms of autistic children, like in the education circles. Like I've talked to my mum about it as well a lot. This idea of joint attention. I don't know if it's necessarily something that I experience in adulthood. What do you guys think? Do you have experiences of not having joint attention? Ketamine balances glutamine, GABA in the brain. Interesting. I've heard a lot of good stuff about ketamine-related therapies, but I'm hesitant. I don't think you can get it in the UK either, to be honest. If my boyfriend came in here right now, I would barely notice him. I don't think it's necessarily about like noticing people. It's about have you seen that TikTok trend where like I think it's like this test that a lot of women were doing on their boyfriends for like TikTok, whereby they sort of look out the window and they say, oh, there's a cool bird. And if their boyfriend comes over and looks at it, then the relationship's going to be good. If they don't, it's a bad sign and it's not going to be good. But what I think about the whole idea of doing that as a test, that's kind of like joint attention. It's like you are both focusing on one thing. So it's like the whole thing about, you know, if you look upwards in sort of the street, people are more likely to look upwards because they're exhibiting joint attention. I don't know if I do that in adulthood, to be honest. It's not really something that I've monitored in myself. Maybe I will do. I'll see if I can see any signs of it in adulthood. Hello, Nova. Okay, if you told me that the building's on fire, I wouldn't hear him. Yeah. I think that's more related to hyperfocus, to be honest. Yeah, it's like a social thing. Like, you're looking at something interesting, and you go, hey, that's interesting. And someone else comes over and looks at it with you. That's what joint attention is.
And so individuals with PTSD or trauma symptoms also struggle with that. Remember, they struggle with inattention. And sometimes that inability to have joint attention is due to inattention. They really cannot zone in and pay attention. The next thing, and this is more specifically for kids.
I think that's wrong. We can definitely zoom in and pay attention, just not what other people, especially as kids, not what other people want us to pay attention to. You know, it's got to be interesting to us. Just found the stream. How you guys are doing? Well, I have a drum. Glad I found you. It's good to have you here, drummer. How you doing?
kids, parallel play, that's sitting next to another child and playing at the same time, maybe sharing in on that play activity. Kids with autism, they go their own route. They want to be over there somewhere in the corner playing while there's another child over there. Individuals who have a trauma history, youths or youngsters who have PTSD or some kind of trauma, they're also that same way. They would rather isolate and sometimes withdraw, as opposed to interacting with the child in the moment during a play activity.
I don't think we have an issue with parallel play, because I'm pretty sure that that's often highlighted within the autistic community as being like an autism love language, sort of doing something something else from the other person, but sort of staying in the same vicinity. I think it's more the fact that, I don't know about you guys or other people, but when I was younger, if I was playing in the vicinity of another child, there was a high likelihood that they would try to grab what I wanted or what I was playing with, So I would just go off on myself to avoid that. No, we parallel play if we want to do the thing. I'd say the biggest clue that I'm autistic is that I don't feel rewarded by imitating someone. Apparently neurotypicals ultimately enjoy doing as part of a group. What do you mean imitating?
Activity. I don't want this video to be too long, but the next one is restricted speech or eye contact. Individuals that have an autism spectrum disorder can struggle, depending on that spectrum, depending on where you are and where that person is on the spectrum. They can have a really hard time with speech. Their speech is restricted. They either, talk at late ages, or they may have a speech impediment, or they may even have a different, speech pattern. Where they sound different. I once had a kid who had a phonological disorder, and he had a lot of speech issues. Wonderful kid, but he sounded like he was from the UK, and he was not. He was born in the United States and lived in Canada for many years, but he sounded as if he was from the UK. He had a restricted and altered speech pattern. It was very interesting. So a lot of people on the autism spectrum deal with that. Well, guess what? A lot of people who have been traumatized also have restricted speech. Sometimes they don't talk until later stages. Sometimes they're catatonic, meaning that they lose the ability to interact in their lives, right? They become mute. There's also the idea of selective mutism, or not really hearing. It's not that you can't hear. Everything is working properly. It's that you choose what you want to listen to, and you choose what you want.
No, that's not what selective mutism is. Oh my god. It shouldn't be called selective mutism. Some people have like a sort of anxiety response where they sort of semi shut down in terms of speaking. I've had it quite a few times in my life, which I can imagine that would happen for people with anxiety as well, to a certain degree, if you're in like a social situation. Yikes, lol, yeah. Situational mutism. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of... I can imagine that this person does a lot of work with kids, not too much with autistic adults. Selective mutism is the inability to process and speak at the same time. Are you sure? Is it selective mutism or dissociation? I have experienced it a lot. As I said, specifically when it comes to shutdowns, can't speak sometimes. Wouldn't say that it's like I hear other stuff and I respond to that, but then I can't respond to someone who's asking me a question. You know what I mean? Interesting. That's why we need to educate therapists, yeah.
You want to tune out. And sometimes the mind and the brain does that unconsciously, so you don't know you're tuning out. So all of these things can happen with kids who have autism, adults who have autism, teenagers, and also individuals who have been traumatized. Learning disabilities, dyslexia, all of that can also be present in both disorders. Depression symptoms and anxiety can be present in both disorders. And there's other things like hallucinations and delusions can also be present in individuals who have trauma symptoms, but it can also be present in individuals who are diagnosed with a developmental disorder, such as autism spectrum disorder. So, very as you can see based on this video, autism and trauma are this close. It's really hard to figure it out. That's why there are specialized tests, assessments, and very experienced individuals who counsel and treat and manage the disorder, whether that's autism spectrum or trauma. And
do you think that it's that like a lot of the root causes of a lot of these crossovers might be related to anxiety and social anxiety, or some level of like paranoia, or, you know, if you're anxious all the time, you want to make sure that things are more certain, have more control over them. You know, if you social anxiety, you might find it hard to make eye contact. You might find yourself going, you know, being situationally mute. I think there's a lot of things that I can think of, but usually a lot of these crossover things that I'm hearing, they're kind of checking the box of anxiety, you know? Do you know what I mean? It's like you're managing or you're responding to feelings of anxiety. I shut down a lot in certain social situations. I find it both comforting and frustrating. Yes. I mean, it's good. Like, dissociation serves like a protective mechanism. You know, that's why a lot of the time when I talk about shutdowns, I describe them as being protective, because it's not that they're not comfortable. It's not that they're comfortable. It's not that I feel good when I'm having a shutdown. It's just, it kind of dulls my surroundings, my sensory systems. It kind of focuses me in. It's like kind of being in a bubble, you know, sort of protecting me from becoming more and more overstimulated to the point where I have a meltdown. I seem to have more intense emotions than a lot of people. Interesting. I find it easier to sing than to speak. Yeah, I mean, situations where I do go situationally mute, I can still text. I can still write on my phone. It's actually an interesting thing that I was talking to Emma about on our recent podcast episode. If you remember, you'll be able to see it sort of in the feed, but we're speaking about, because their jaw kind of locks up because of their cerebral palsy. They have dystonia, so they have like a strong muscle tone. Sometimes their jaw locks. We're talking about the ways that we both get through situations where we can't speak. It's very interesting. I have this weird ability to shut down while in a sort of safe mode, stays functional to get me out of the situation safely. Yes. Yeah. It's like a bubble, isn't it? Would you say this is more of a strategy that you developed consciously? No. I didn't develop it consciously. Unconsciously, maybe. Who knows? Usually related to a lot of intense anxiety, to be honest. When I'm in bad mental health states, high anxiety, much more likely that I'm going to go situation mute, have more shutdowns, experience more meltdowns than if I'm not, you know. Also, when it comes to socializing and like how much sensory input I can manage, it's all kind of interconnected, I think. Peter says the reason why autism and trauma look so similar is because of how society is traumatizing to autistic people, because of how grating it is in contrast to how individual processes and conducts. Interesting. Anyone have issues with grinding teeth? Yes, that's unmet oral motor needs. Get some chewables or some gum. It'll change your life.
And they do it the right way because they're trained, right? It's really hard to tease it apart. And that's why I highly discourage many of my clients, my YouTube subscribers, my personal associates, not to diagnose or not to start throwing around labels, because it's really hard to decipher between the two. Now, there's one more thing. I was going to say two, but there's one more thing that I want to add to this. We also have to keep in mind one important thing, that trauma is not something that you are born with, and autism spectrum disorder is. So I want to make sure that you understand that trauma is not something that you are born with. It's something that happens to you over time, and the symptoms of trauma can be acquired over time, depending on what your experience is. Now, autism is a developmental disorder, so it's going to be there from childbirth on, right? So that's a very important part to keep in mind. Autism spectrum is developmental. It's there at birth. You may not notice it at birth, and it may take years before a person can get diagnosed, but it's something that's there. It's internal, it's genetic, it's there. Trauma is not. So trauma symptoms are acquired over time based on that trauma and how you deal with it and how you manage it, your treatment choice, all that stuff. So yeah, this is a lot, guys. So if you have questions about this, let me know in the comment section.
I do also want to point out that that heavy crossover between autism and trauma. It's a very big thing, and just because it's not really a situation of like either this or that in a lot of cases, you know. Just because you're autistic doesn't mean that you don't develop trauma, PTSD. And also, if you have PTSD, it doesn't mean that you're not autistic. So it's, you know, it's good to keep that in mind. Very mixed video. Not sure how I feel about it, but I think there's some good sort of suggestions for some crossover traits that was definitely a good sort of stimulus for conversation. But that was Tamara Hill, Asperger's and Trauma Similarities and Confusion, Psychotherapy Crash Course, if you want to go check that video out yourself.